This is 11 Honors, and we're reading the next to last chapter in the book. This is the letter that he wasn't supposed to read until the death or disappearance of Jekyll. There's something like that. It's kind of weird. So you said you wanted to read your heart out. You can start and then pass it around. If you'd rather start, you can fight among yourselves. 53.
For us.
Oh, sorry. It's Dr. Lanyon's narrative, and it's I think we read the introduction part, so it's the letter part, 10th December, year 18.
Dear Lanyon, you were one of my oldest friends.
Now, who's speaking? It's Jekyll to Lanyon. All right.
And although we may have deferred at times on scientific questions, I cannot remember, at least on my side, any break in your affection. There was never a day when, if you had said to me, Jekyll, my life, my honor, my reason depend upon you, I would not have sacrificed my fortune or my left hand to help you. Lanyon, my life, my honor, my reason are all at your mercy. If you failed me tonight, I am lost. You might suppose after this preface that I'm going to ask you for something dishonorable to grant. Judge for yourself.
Can I ask you a question? When you read Jekyll, my life, something and my reason depend on you, what was that other thing? What does it say in your version? My life, my
honor.
I thought you said fortune, and I thought that's interesting. There'd be a discrepancy there, but anyway, I just asked.
I want you to postpone all other engagements for tonight. Even if you were summoned to the bedside of an emperor to take a cab, unless your carriage should be actually at the door, and with this letter in your hand for consultation, to drive straight to my house. Poole, my butler, has his orders. You will find him waiting your arrival with the locksmith. The door of my cabinet is then to be forced, and you are to go in alone, to open the glazed press on the left hand, breaking the lock if it be shut, and to draw out with all its contents as they stand. The fourth drawer from the top, or which is the same thing, the third from the bottom. In my extreme distress of mind, I have a morbid fear of misdirecting you. But even if I am in error, you may know the right drawer by its contents. Some powders, a
File, yeah.
a paper book. This drawer I beg of you to carry back with you to Cavendish Square exactly as it stands. That is the first part of the service. Now for the second, you should be back. If you set out at once on the receipt of this, long before midnight, but I will leave you that amount of margin, not only in the fear of one of those obstacles that can neither be prevented nor foreseen, but because an hour when your servants are in bed is to be preferred for what will then remain to do. At midnight then, I have to ask you to be alone in the consulting room, to admit with your own hand into the house a man who will present himself in my name, and to place in his hands the drawer that you will have brought with you from my cabinet. Then you will have played your part and earned my gratitude completely. 5 minutes afterwards, if you insist upon an explanation, you will have understood that these arrangements are the capital importance, and that by the neglect of one of them, fantastic as they must appear, you might have charged your conscience with my death or the shipwreck of my reason. Confident as I am that you will not trifle with this appeal, my heart sinks and my hand trembles at the bare thought of such a possibility. Think of me at this hour in a strange place, laboring under a blackness of distress that no fancy can exaggerate, and yet well aware that if you will but punctually serve me, my troubles roll away like a story that is told. Serve me, my dear Lanyon, and save your friend H.J.
You mind reading the P.S. and then Sierra can finish this?
P.S. I had already sealed this up when a fresh terror struck upon my soul. It is possible that the post office may fail me, and this letter not come into your hands until tomorrow morning. In that case, dear Lanyon, do my errand when it shall be the most convenient for you in the course of the day, and once more expect my messenger at midnight. It may then already be too late, and if that night passes without event, you will know that you have seen the last of Henry Jekyll.
Upon the reading of this letter, I made sure my colleague was insane.
Okay, now Jekyll is speaking. I'm sorry. Now Lanyon is speaking. That letter was a letter to Lanyon from Jekyll. now this is Jekyll's explanation of what that was all about. I'm sorry, this is Lanyon's explanation of what happened that night. And this is, remember, Utterson is reading all this in his study.
But till that was proved beyond the possibility of doubt, I felt bound to do as he requested. The less I understood of this fair go, the less I was in position to judge of its importance. An appeal so worded could not be set aside without the grave responsibility. I rose accordingly from table, got into a hansom, and drove straight to Jekyll's house. The butler was waiting my approval. He had received by the same post as mine as a registered letter of instruction, and had sent at once for a locksmith and a carpenter. The tradesman came while we were yet speaking, and we moved in a body to old Dr. Denman's surgical theater, from which, as you are doubtless aware, Jekyll's private cabinet is most conveniently entered. The door is very strong, the lock excellent. The carpenter avowed he would have great trouble and have to do much damage, if force were to be used, and the locksmith was near despair. But this last was a handy fellow, and after 2 hours' work the door stood open. The press marked E was unlocked, and I took out the drawer, had it filled up with straw and tied in a sheet, and returned with it to Cavendish Square. Here I proceeded to examine its contents. The powders were neatly enough made up, but not with the nicety of the dispensing chemist, so that it was plain they were of Jekyll's private manufacture. And when I opened one of the wrappers, I found what seemed to me a simple crystalline salt of a white color. The phial, to which I next turned my attention, might have been about half full of a blood-red liquor, which was highly pungent? Is that it? To the sense of smell, and seemed to me to contain phosphorus and some volatile ether. At the other ingredients I could make no guess. The book was an ordinary version book and contained little but a series of dates. These covered a period of many years, but I observed that the entries ceased nearly a year ago and quite abruptly. Here and there a brief remark was appended to a date, usually no more than a single word, double, occurring perhaps 6 times in a total of several hundred entries, and once very early in the list and followed by several marks of exclamation and total failure. All this, though it whetted my curiosity, told me little that was definite. Here was a phial of some tincture, a paper of some salt, and the record of a series of experiments that had led, like too many of Jekyll's investigations, to no end of practical usefulness. How could the presence of these articles in my house affect either the honor, the sanity, or the life of my flighty colleague? If his messenger could go to one place, why could he not go to another? And even granting some impediment, why was this gentleman to be received by him in secret? The more I reflected, the more convinced I grew that I was dealing with a case of cerebral disease. Though I dismissed my servants to bed, I loaded an old revolver that I might be found in some posture of self-defense. 12 o'clock had scarce rung out over London, ere the knocker sounded very gently on the door. I went myself at the summons and found a small man crouching against the pillars of the portico. "Are you come for Dr. Jekyll?" I asked. He told me yes, by a constrained gesture, and when I had bidden him enter, he did not obey me without a searched backward glance into the darkness of the square. There was a policeman not far off, advancing with his bull's eye open, and at the sight I thought my visitor started and made greater haste. These particulars struck me, I confess, disagreeably, and as I followed him into the bright light of the consulting room, I kept my hand ready on my weapon. Here at last I had a chance of clearly seeing him. I had never set eyes on him before, so much was certain. He was small, as I have said. I was struck besides with the shocking expression of his face, with his remarkable combination of a great muscular activity and great apparent debility of constitution, and last but not least, with the old subjective disturbance caused by his neighborhood. This bore some resemblance to the incipient rigor, and was accompanied by a marked sinking of the pulse. At the time, I set it down to some
Idiosyncratic.
personal distaste, and merely wondered at the acuteness of the symptoms. But I have since had reason to believe the cause to lie much deeper in the nature of man, and to turn of such nobler hinge than the principle of hatred. This person, who had thus from the first moment of his entrance struck in me what I can only describe
accoutrement.
Was far from moving me to laughter. Rather, as there was something abnormal and misbegotten in the very essence of the creature that now faced me, something seizing, surprising, and revolting. This fresh disparity seemed but to fit in with and to reinforce it, so that to my interest in the man's nature and character, there was added a curiosity as to his origin, his life, his fortune, and status in the world.
What do you notice about the man? It's his way he looks to this Lanyon.
Small.
He's small, but what about the clothes? They're too big for him. Have any idea what's going on there?
Is he a kid?
That would be an answer. It sounds like he is. He isn't, but that could be. All right, we'll see. You can keep reading or pass it, Isabella. That means yes. If she had done the other show, it had been no.
These observations, though they have taken so great space to be set down, are yet the work of a few seconds. My visitor was indeed on fire with soul and obsession. He bought it, he cried, and so lively was his impatience, that he even laid his hand upon my arm and sought to shake me. I put him back, conscious at his touch of a certain icy pang of red blood. Come, sir, said I, you forget that I have not yet the pleasure of your acquaintance. Be seated if you please.
Notice how formal Lanyon is, and you know this. We know kind of what's going on, but notice again, they always observe these protocols and these proprieties. That's part of the book. We hadn't really emphasized, but it's true. Go ahead.
And I showed him an example and sat down myself in my customary seat, and with as fair an imitation of my ordinary manner to a patient as the lateness of the hour, the nature of my preoccupations, and the horror I had of my visitor would suffer me to muster. I beg your pardon, Dr. Lanyon, he replied civilly enough. What you say is very well founded, and my impatience has shown its nails to her politeness. I come here at the instance of your colleague, Dr. Henry Jekyll, on a piece of business of some moment, and I understood. He paused and put his hand to his throat, and I could see, in spite of his collected manner, that he was wrestling against the approaches of the hysteria. I understood the door. But here I took pity on my visitor's suspense, and some perhaps on my own growing curiosity. There it is, sir, said I, pointing to the drawer, where it lay on the floor behind a table and still covered with a sheet. He sprang to it and then paused, and laid his hand upon its heart. I could hear his teeth grate with the convulsive action of his jaws, and his face was so ghastly to see that I grew alarmed both for his life and reason.
Do you know the way he goes to the drawer? It says he sprang to it. You could hear his teeth, I guess, sort of grating against each other. What do those images make you think of? He sprang to it, and I could hear his teeth grate. Like, yes, it's animal-like. Go ahead. Yes.
Oh, compose yourself, said I. He turned a dreadful smile to me, and as if with the decision of despair, plucked away the sheet. At the sight of the contents, he uttered one loud sob of such immense relief that I sat petrified. In the next moment, in a voice that was already fairly well under control, "Have you a graduated class?" he asked. I rose from my place with something of an effort and gave him what he asked.
Delaney.
He thanked me with a smiling nod, measured out a few mils of a red tincture, and added one of the powders. The mixture, which was at first of a reddish hue, began the preparation of crystals melted to brighten and color.
Effervesce, bubble.
Effervesce audibly, and throw it off small fumes of vapor. Suddenly, and at the same moment, the ebullition ceased, and the compound changed to dark purple, which faded again more slowly to a watery green. My visitor, who had watched these
Metamorphoses.
metamorphoses with a keen eye, smiled, set down a glass and put it upon the table, and then turned and looked upon me with an air of
Scrutiny, yeah.
And now, said he, to settle what remains, will you be wise? Will you be guided? Will you suffer me to take this glass in my hand and go forth from your house without further folly? Or has the greed of curiosity too much
prodigy.
and stagger the unbelieving Satan.
You notice what he said? He's challenging Jekyll, Lanyon. He said, I'll leave here, and you'll forever wonder what this was all about. Or you can sit here, and you can learn something. And he says, or if you prefer to choose a new province of knowledge, fame, and power. Who does that sound like when it comes to science? Knowledge, fame, and power. Somebody we read about. It happens to be Sierra's favorite book. Dr. Frankenstein. He had the same motivations. You know, and I bet, well, you can pretty much guess that he read the book. I'm sure that Stevenson read it. All right. You want to keep reading?
Sure.
Thanks.
Does chocolate serve? Did I stop at serve?
Well, that's where you stop. Yeah.
Sir, said I am affecting a coolness that I was far from truly possessing. You speak
Enigmas, which are riddles, or riddles.
enigmas, and you will perhaps not wonder that I hear you with no very strong impression of believing. But I have gone too far in the way of an explicable services to pause before I see you. It is well, replied my visitor. Lanyon, you remember your vows. What falls is under the seal of our profession. And now you have so long been bound to most narrow and material views. You have denied the virtue of a transcendental medicine, and you have
Derided.
derided your superiors beyond.
And you can make a note of this, that Jekyll seems to be taunting Lanyon, because they have had disagreements about the purpose of science. And if you've paid any attention to the COVID stuff in the last 2 years, and the vaccines and how to treat COVID, everybody has been using the term, just follow the science. And sometimes, according to two different camps, the other camp was not following the science. The lockdowns, the vaccines, the masks were all about following the science. And other people said, you've misread the science, or you're lying about the science because the science says this. And so, isn't that interesting? You'd think science, gravity exists. Nobody's going to argue with it. That's science, right? Science discovered that. So they are having a disagreement about science, which I think is interesting here in the story. You want to finish it? You just got one more. Yeah.
Can I use the restroom real quick?
Can she finish?
Yeah.
Or if you need to go, but she better finish.
As it lasted, his listen drank out one cold. A cry followed. He reeled, staggered, clutched at the table, and held on, staring with dejected eyes and gasping with open mouth. And as I looked there, I came. I thought a change. He seemed to swell. His face became suddenly black, and the features seemed to melt and alter. In the next moment, I had sprung to my feet and leaned back against the wall. My arms raised to shield from me the lethargy, my mind submerged in terror. Oh God, I screamed, and oh God, again and again, for there, before my eyes pale and shaken, and I fainted and groping before him with his hands, like a man restored from death, and there stood Henry Jekyll.
So Lanyon watched Jekyll change from Hyde back to Jekyll because of the potion that he was drinking. You think that's a little bit over what do you call it? Over sensational. Oh God, I screamed, and oh God. Doesn't that sound like almost? It sounds almost funny to me. It sounds like overreacting.
I thought Hyde was dead.
Yeah, this is a letter that Utterson is reading after the death of Hyde, and the letter is from Lanyon. Because remember, Lanyon changed and died. Something about
So Lanyon isn't Utterson.
No, Lanyon is a different person. He's the doctor who was a good friend of Jekyll, but they disagreed, and Utterson had talked to him, and at that time they had estranged. Their friendship was estranged. And then he goes back to see him, and well, you'll see what happens. He dies. This event, witnessing this event kills Lanyon. Delaney.
What he told me in the next hour, I cannot bring my mind to set on paper. I saw what I saw, I heard what I heard, and my soul sickened at him. Yet now when that sight has faded from my eyes, I ask myself if I
unbelieving. I mean, he cannot, but incredulous is the word. He can't believe what he just witnessed and what he heard.
As for my moral interpretation of that man unveiled to me, even with the tears of penitence, I cannot, even in my memory, dwell on it without a start of horror. I will say but one thing, utter sin, and that if you can bring your mind to credit it, will be more than enough. The creature who crept into my house that night, on Jekyll's own confession, known by the name of Hyde, and haunted for in every corner of the land as a murderer of him.
So during this time when this happened, Hyde was, nobody had seen him because he was being searched for by the police because they know he killed the guy Carew. All right, so we come to Jekyll's full statement. If you want to go, we're going to keep reading, but we won't read all of it. It's kind of it's what, 17 pages, but we'll read the first few pages, and I have a question for you. This is Dr. Jekyll, all right? This is a letter from Dr. Jekyll. Dr. Jekyll is dead, or Mr. Hyde is dead. We don't know about Dr. Jekyll, all right? So let me read it. The I there is Dr. Jekyll, all right? I was born, listen carefully, it's fascinating. I was born in the year 18 to a large fortune, endowed besides with excellent parts, inclined by nature to industry, fond of the respect of the wise and the good among my fellow men, and thus, as might have been supposed, with every guarantee of honorable and distinguished future. Circle these things for me, all right? Excellent parts, which means he was very healthy, inclined by nature to industry, he was hardworking, fond of respect, he liked people to respect him, and he had a great future ahead of him. Sounds like a childhood you and I would love to have had. Maybe we did, but sounds like everybody here. Healthy, you have respect of other people, you're hardworking, that's he's got the whole package, all right? And indeed, the worst of my faults, and this is important, the worst of my faults was a certain impatient gaiety of disposition. Underline that. I don't know what that conjures in your mind. Impatient gaiety of disposition. I think it says he liked to have a good time, whatever that means to him. We don't know what that means to him. Everybody likes to have a good time, right? But we'll have to figure out what that looked like for him. Such as made the happiness of many, but such as I found hard to reconcile with my imperious desire to carry my head high and wear a more than commonly grave countenance before the public. Here I came about that. Hence it came about that I conceal my pleasures, and that when I reached the years of reflection, began to look around me and take stock of my progress in position in the world, I stood already committed to a profound duplicity of life. Underline, profound duplicity of life. About halfway down that paragraph. Do you know what duplicity means? Double. Good, very good. Doubtful, so it also means double. So you put those two together, and basically, and he denies it, but basically he's kind of like a hypocrite. He looks like he's one way, but actually he's also another way. He is both ways. He likes to be serious and grave and respectable, but he likes to have a good time too. All right, so that's his issue. Many a man would have even blazoned such irregularities as I was guilty of, but from the high view that I had set before me, I regarded and hid them with an almost morbid sense of shame. It was thus rather the exacting nature of my aspirations than any particular degradation of my faults that had made me what I was, and with even a deeper trench than in the majority of men, severed in me those provinces of good and ill which divide and compound man's dual nature. In this case, I was driven to reflect deeply and inveterably on that hard law of life which lies at the root of religion and is one of the most plentiful springs of distress. So, though so thorough a double dealer, circle the word double dealer. Double dealer. I was in no sense a hypocrite. This is interesting. He says he's not a hypocrite. Both sides of me were in dead earnest. I was no more myself when I laid aside restraint and plunged in shame than when I labored in the eye of the day at the furtherance of knowledge or the relief of sorrow or suffering. So he's basically saying, I was both of those people. I was two people. I was Jekyll the partier, and I was Jekyll the respectable man. All right? And it chanced that the direction of my scientific studies, which led wholly toward the mystic and transcendental, reacted and shed a strong light on this consciousness of the perennial war among my members. Circle that, perennial war among my members. He's acknowledging that within him, he was fighting something, like the good Jekyll and the bad Jekyll. With every day and from both sides of my intelligence, the moral and the intellectual, I thus drew steadily nearer to the truth, by whose partial discovery I have been doomed to such a dreadful shipwreck, that man is not truly one, but two. Underline that. He says basically all men are two people. They have a side that people see, and they have a side that people will never see. I say two because the state of my own knowledge does not pass beyond that point. Others will follow. Others will outstrip me on the same lines. And I hazard the guess that man will be ultimately known for a mere polity of multifarious, incongruous, and independent denizens. Do you understand what he's saying? He's saying, I have two personalities. I'm two different people. But there may be people that are three different people or four different people. Do you not see the connection with the argument we're having in this country about sexuality and identity? You know, here's somebody who is two people. You know, they have two different approaches to sexuality. Maybe they're, and I've heard new names. I don't even know what they mean. You got trans, and you've got there's another word that means you're neither one or you're both. So you see, he was way ahead of his time in discussing the idea that we have multiple personalities. And would that be true? If someone thought he was both, like two different things, would you, just from a common sense point of view, would that be healthy? Like you're a whole, isn't wholeness something even psychology strives after? You want to be a whole person. But what if you're struggling in yourself because you're two different people? Some people would say they're both a man and a woman. Would that bring peace, the acknowledgement of that, or would that create some sort of unpeace, in your life? I think he's talking, he's not aware in 1880, whenever he wrote this, he's not aware that one day we would be having those discussions. Let me keep reading. I, for my own part, and from the nature of my life, advance infallibly in one direction and one direction only. It was on the moral side. And in my own person, I learned to recognize the thorough and primitive duality of man. Circle that phrase, duality of man. He's saying basically all of us are at least two people. The side people see and the side people don't see. Now I have a question. What's wrong with that? Like some of the things I mentioned, like you really think you're two people, that would be, I think, unhealthy. But what about the fact that, would I recognize you, or would you recognize each other if we saw you in a different context? Are you a different person at home? Well, I probably am, aren't you? Is there anything wrong with that?
No.
But I guess it's the degree at which you're different. Like what am I like at home? We're all more relaxed, we're more casual, but what if we were a completely different person? Like the opposite of the way we were.
Are you telling me that you go to frat parties, Mr. Fowler, every weekend?
I don't. I'm probably too old. I don't think they would let me in, for one thing. But my question is, where do you draw the line? Like, when you go to the prom, you're gonna dress up. Are you pretending you're somebody you're not? Or is that perfectly normal? What do you think? Isn't that perfectly normal on a fancy occasion to dress accordingly? Right? So, do you understand what he's saying? You understand? He's talking about somebody. Have you ever seen these shows that are creepy about somebody who literally thinks they have 3 different personalities? Like they're an old man. I don't know. That'd be dumb. But you know, like there was a famous movie called 3 Faces of Eve, and she had 3 different personalities. She had 3 different voices.
Isn't that a disorder?
Yes, exactly. But why is it considered a disorder? And some of the things we're talking about now, not a disorder. Like what if you chose? I guess we're assuming this person didn't choose to be 3 different people, right? But what if you chose to be that way? Would that make it less of a disorder?
Well, people with personality disorders have like a chemical imbalance.
Right. They didn't cause it, right? They didn't make a decision. But what about those people that decide they want to be 2 different people?
Wait, like who?
What? Well, like you're a man and a woman.
Let's just-
decision that people make.
Okay.
I think that's non-binary. Like they're.
So they have no choice in that. All
I
right.
mean, I don't. Because of all the stuff that people say about them and how people judge them, I don't think anyone would want to be judged. So they probably wouldn't want to choose that. I think that
I think it's thunder.
it would probably make them more comfortable
All
with
right.
themselves. probably.
That's a legitimate thing to say. Can you think of something though that's not that way? That's not. Can you think of a situation that's
Like
not?
two-faced,
Yeah.
fake people.
What does that mean?
Like you're nice to someone but then you actually like hate them.
Well, what if you were kind to people and then you go home and somebody beats their children or beats their wife? That would not be considered. Would that be a disorder? Was that a crime or is it a sin or what would you call that?
Probably just be psychopath.
Okay, but you mentioned you used a psychological term. Does that mean that if they're psychopaths, sounds like they're not really responsible? When do you start attaching responsibility to people and decision to people? When is it no longer something you cannot control and something you can control? I mean, where does that? I'm not sure that the science knows where that line is. Like, you see what I'm getting at? That's what he's talking about here. That's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He's saying, in a way, he's always been these 2 people, so is it a crime?
I think it draws the line if you're changing how you act towards people or if you're changing yourself for your own well-being.
So you're talking about the motive is important.
Yeah.
All right, well, anyway, I think we get the message. You are reading a book about that. Let me finish. We just got a couple minutes. All right, duality of man. Did you circle that? I saw that of the 2 natures that contended in the field of my consciousness, even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was because I was radically both. That he's claiming that he really is 2 different people. All right, you see that, ladies? And from an early date, even before the course of my scientific discoveries had begun to suggest the most naked possibility of such a miracle, I had learned to dwell with pleasure as a beloved daydream on the thought of separation from these elements. So wouldn't it be something if you were psychologically 2 different people, wouldn't it be great if you could take a pill or take a potion that could literally separate you into 2 different people? He just said that. His daydream was the thought of separating the party animal from the serious scientist. Like he could actually be 2 different people. If each, I told myself, could be housed in separate identities, life would be relieved of all that was unbearable. The unjust might go his way, delivered from the aspirations and remorse of a more upright twin, and the just could walk steadfastly and securely in his upward path, doing good, in which he found pleasure and no longer exposed to disgrace and penitence by the hands of this extraneous evil. It was the course of mankind that these incongruous, and that is bundle, so you know question what he's getting at, were thus bound together, that in the agonized womb of consciousness, these polar twins should be continuously struggling. How then were they to be disassociated? So do you understand the principle? He's trying to divide his two personalities into two different people. Now what would, if there was a bad, let's just think of it. Think of yourself. Part of you's bad, part of you good. What happens when you're bad? What's the problem when you're bad? Like you want to be bad, and you're being bad, but what's the problem with it? I can think of two problems. What would they be?
You lose respect.
Okay, so you get caught. You mean from other people?
Yeah.
You could get in jail. You do something bad, but also you always feel guilty. So how is it possible to be bad and not feel guilty? That's kind of what he's getting at. I don't want to feel guilty when I do this. I want to enjoy doing this, but every time I do this, I feel kind of guilty. And then the other side is, what about the good? What's the problem with being good? You always want to do the bad thing. And so what if I could separate the two, and the bad guy looked completely different from the good guy? He could always get away with it. And the good guy looked completely from the bad guy, and he wouldn't have to ever feel guilty. You get what he's getting at? We don't have time to do any more, but the rest of it is his explanation of how he created a potion that separated the two. I won't see you next week, but we'll try to do this tomorrow. I know. I feel the same way. I'm going to give you a copy of this tomorrow, and we'll probably read a little more. I don't know how long it'll take us to read this, but we won't do it tomorrow necessarily. I want to talk about what Scripture says about the idea of being two people, because Paul talks about it as well as this guy. So we're on page 62.
I think you should just come on the Charleston trip.
What?
I think you should just come on the Charleston trip.
Yeah, we could do this on the Charleston.
Maybe not
What are you
this.
doing?
Just like,
But we still have one more day. Wait a minute, hang on. Let's look at the